Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're very warmly welcome to this session number 24, if I'm not mistaken. We are going to be talking about the elite and asking if they are to blame for all of society's problems. So it's a bit of a huge question. I work on the radio. Aliette Ovin, I work on France Culture, and I have 5 guests with me. We've got, and we're also with Maya Bakash, who's going to introduce the session to us, describe it. So you'll see all of the panelists in a minute. We've worked hard, Alien and I, Maya and I. So I would like to say that there is quite a bit of pressure on our shoulders. When I was talking today about the question of elites, we're continuing a very long tradition. When we can look back to this subject, which began centuries ago, and today it's the anniversary. In 1916, over 100 years ago, 110 years ago, there was an economist called Vilfredo Pareto who came up with a theory about elites in a book which he wrote, and he said that the elites are necessary. We need the elite classes, so that society can function properly. That there were rules, institutional rules, there were individuals who made sure that the elite remained in power as long as possible until they were replaced. That's what he described this cycle. In 1916 was also the year, when we read the book by Pepper Culpepper, we learn this. 1916 was also the year where Rockefeller became the first millionaire in the world. And back in that day, being a millionaire meant that you were even richer than Elon Musk is today. So society really has changed. I think there's a link, a direct link between those two events in that year, 1916, concentration of wealth and power. It's a link that we're going to be talking about today. We've got many, many questions to address to know if it's inevitable, if elite exist, do we want to replace them? What kind of solution can we come up with this anti-elite sentiment, and how can we satisfy all expectations? And I'm going to hand the floor initially to Maya Bakash, and then I will introduce to you the 5 panelists who I have up on stage with me. So Maya, over to you. Thank you very much, Aliette. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just delighted to be with you today, and I'm delighted to be on this round table with some prestigious panelists. They're all very passionate about this subject. So are elites to blame for all of our problems? Well, it's a tautological sentence. We have to define what responsibility is. The elite is always in power, and by definition they are responsible. But if we continue the sentence, if we note that there are problems and political failures, the first reflex is to say, let's get rid of the elite and let's exchange them, let's elect other people, other characters. So you see where I'm heading. So for me, the challenge here is how can we avoid what we had in the 1930s, i.e. upending the elites to get into a worse situation. So we have to be able to approach subjects differently to avoid worse situations. So what have economists said about that? We see that the 20th century model offers economic elites, economists. This 20th century model has failed, and we need to take stock of this failure. So this model says that innovation and technological progress is a source of wealth, because thanks to technological progress you can increase productivity and increase revenue. That's the first hypothesis. Second hypothesis is that wealth is good. That GDP, which measures all of revenue in a given space, that indicator, GDP, is the right indicator for the wealth of everybody, i.e. the happiness of everybody, but I think we need to question that one as well. And above all, thanks to technological progress, we are all going to be richer as a group and individually, because we have implemented different distribution mechanisms which make sure that everybody's going to benefit. Technological progress is going to make us all so much richer, and we're going to have the means to redistribute wealth. That doesn't mean there's going to be more inequality, but it means more or less we're going to have more. So that was the business model, and that went hand in hand with the political model, which said that thanks to international trade, which is a source of growth, we are going to make sure that there is peace between states. So that's a kind of a dream, which, given my age, I was part of that dream. I believed in that dream. I thought that thanks to innovation, we're all going to be in a world in peace, which is growing and which is very prosperous. So I'm not going to list the number of errors in that thesis, but we should concentrate on inequalities. We are unable, as a liberal democracy, to redistribute wealth so that everybody is believing in the model. There are inequalities. Just take a look at the work by Thomas Piketty and all of the economists who are following in his wake, talking about inequalities, focusing on the poorest of the middle class and the upper class, and he has analyzed the 1% or 0.1% of the elite, saying that these inequalities really have exploded since the 90s. So the top 1% in the United States holds 20% of wealth in the United States, 12% in Europe. So these are figures which you should keep in mind. The wealth that you can accumulate throughout your life, your wealth equals 3 times annual GDP in the 1990s. It's 6 times GDP today in France. So there has been an explosion in inequalities. And everything is concentrated in the top percentages. That's what we call, in other works, is called polarization. And it's a very important notion for economists today. It means that we had this notion that technological process would bring growth, etc., and we'd redistribute it, and then behind all that, each individual would, thanks to meritocracy, would be able to climb the ladder. But what polarization is showing is that in reality, there's a bit of a hole in terms of the middle class. It's linked to digital technologies. It's probably with AI, or even before AI, different changes linked to economic concentration with big digital companies. We are seeing the work market being transformed, which is positive for the most qualified with the highest qualifications. It's also very favorable to those with few qualifications because technology doesn't impact them very much. And the huge class of losers are the middle class. And the middle class is the foundation of living well together. So without the middle class and with this polarization, we have a lot more social conflict and there's a lot more inequality. So the picture I'm painting is very negative, and I'm doing this on purpose to start the discussion, and I'm going to see what our panelists have to say about this. Thank you very much, Maya. So I'm going to introduce to you now the 5 VIPs who I have here on the stage with me. We're not going to do it by alphabetical order this time. We're going to start geographically. We've got Robert Zarada. You're sitting next to Maya. You're an economist. You founded Bonafide, an agency. You're the CEO and the chairman of that. And you can explain to us how we think here in France about these questions. What is the French opinion? Next to you, you have Pepper Culpepper, who is a professor at the Blavatnik School of Government at Oxford University, and you co-wrote with Taipoli a book called Billionaire Backlash, The Age of Corporate Scandal and How It Can Save Democracy, which was published at the beginning of the year. Next to you, we have Hakim Ben Hamouda, who's Executive Director of the Global Institute for Transition. You were, in the past, in Tunisia, a Minister for Finance and President of the African Development Bank. Next to you, we have Jorge Zepeda, who studied economics at Guadalajara, and then you became a journalist. You founded several newspapers in Mexico, and you are currently a political journalist in different papers. And next to me, I've got Leon Loluza, who is Executive President and Dean of the CP Business School, and you're also VP in charge of international relations and the conference of major schools. So thank you very much, all 5 panelists, for being here with us today. Let's start with you, Robert Zarada, if you don't mind, because yes, we've got different points of view. You've heard 2 French women speaking so far. Let's broaden the discussion. On our panel, we've got Mexico, United States, Spain, etc. Let's have a good look. So, Robert Zarada, so if we take a look at what the situation is today, there's an anti-elite movement. Was there a kind of crux when this started to be accentuated? So how can we describe the situation today, and how can we explain some errors which have been made in the past? Well, yes, there was a unique period of time linked to how the political context developed and the different balance of power in politics in several countries. It is the case in France. We have seen stringent polarization here in France with a kind of symmetry for the origin of the elites. We've got the far right and the far left, for example, and both of those, far right and far left, have a vocabulary with various messages criticizing the elite and rejecting the elite. If we want to take a look at the question which is being put to us today, well, are they responsible or are they not? Are they responsible or are they irresponsible? It's not really the same way of broaching this question. Today, the extremes and are criticizing the elites. They're talking about their irresponsible nature. And they're choosing to do this, and why does it work? Well, it works in the media and in politics. It works because the elite, particularly here in France, are structured in such a way. They are structured in corporations, technostructures, administrative departments, which are very closed. And very, very quickly, they appeared as being totally disconnected from everyday reality of people. And that disconnection is both useful to both extremes, right and left, because it means that they can criticize the elite by rendering them responsible for all of our problems. Let's not underestimate the responsibility of the elites in all of our problems. We mustn't underestimate that. But we can't really say that everything that's going wrong is their fault and everything which is right is not thanks to them. So I think people are fascinated by the elite. They fantasize about the elite. And we might wonder if one day we might become part of the elite. And if we take an amused look at this, I would say that this morning there are 37 candidates for the French presidential election. 37 candidates. I've been reading a lot of articles talking about the overproduction of elite. We've got an overproduction of candidates who want to become part of the elite. And their backgrounds are very, very different. They come from the media, from economics, from politics. Each of them, each candidate, thinks that they can become president of the Republic, president of France, which is a way of a very simplistic way of broaching the role of what a president does. So 3/4 of these candidates have no qualifications to become the president of France. But there's a kind of fascination with becoming part of the elite. Second point is very interesting because this has been mentioned by a publication called Le 1, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. And the most recent copy of that says, talking about power. And the question is, why are clowns in power? So are clowns going to replace the elite? It may seem like a bit of a banal question, but I think it's quite realistic, really. It reflects what's going on around the world, and it reflects reality today, which is the power of the media. Because above and beyond the question of redistribution, what is problematic for the elite is the fact that they're indigenous and they're reproducing themselves. And there's a certain number of very serious-minded people who've carried out a lot of serious work. Patrice Sébastien, Power, 18 pages theorizing Cyril Hanouna and Alexandre Gendin. These are the different characters who are candidates. We see that they are discrediting the elite. But we know that there are some plan Bs which are just absurd, but nevertheless it seems to be functioning, and this is a function which is linked to something which I find quite amusing, I think particularly in the power of the media. So in the media we see today that there are indeed, it's a type of entertainment, a diversion mechanism, if you like. It's rather Machiavellic. And this diversion must not be considered, basically, people are thinking about these things, and it's part of polarization, and the voters are thinking about this, and it's a very dangerous thing to consider the elite as useless, because they do have expertise in managing the state, and you can't just overnight become the president of France, as three-quarters of the candidates seem to think they can. Let me tell you a story. The French elite are such an enclosed circle. Just take a look at the number of articles in the newspaper Le Monde, entire pages on schooling in France. It's called L'École Alsacienne. I don't know if you're familiar with L'École Alsacienne. It really is the creme de la creme of schooling in Paris, and they're all the elite are battling it out to see who's going to become the headmaster or headmistress of this school. There are ministers who are fighting it out to identify who's going to be at the head of this school, and it's very symbolic of how the French elite functions. Yes, you deserve a round of applause for that. So there are two problems here, the question of quality and quantity of the elite produced today. You've talked about the role of the media, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that again. We have a journalist on the panel with us here. Pepper Culpepper has already talked about that. So, Pepper Culpepper, I want to ask you precisely, how on earth have we arrived at the situation where there's such mistrust of the, at least as Robert Zaradin has said, we need the elite, and nations can be proud of producing their elite. How have we arrived at this moment in time where the people are putting themselves as against the elite when they're running for a presidential campaign? So is it the very structure of our system? Is it economic structure which has led to an overproduction of these elite? And are these elites too close, politics and economics? How come everyone's so fed up with these elites?
Thanks very much, Aliette. Let me speak from what we've done in our book, which speaks about public opinion in several countries, but notably in the United States, in France, in Germany, and in the United Kingdom. And what we see there is the discussion we're having about elites is a discussion about the political elite and the economic elite intermeshed. But in fact, the economic elite is leaving the political elite behind. And the reason everyone is holding the political elites responsible is because they can't do anything about it. Aliette kindly noted that John D. Rockefeller became the first dollar billionaire in 1916. And of course, Elon Musk a couple of weeks ago became our first trillionaire. And let's look at the difference in the situation in terms of state control under which those happened. Musk is the United States space program now. The United States space program is on the back of Musk. The US government is basically reliant on one of its suppliers to provide what NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Agency, used to provide. Right? We used to look to states to provide the big technological jumps. We saw the Concorde, we saw the TGV. These were things that excited people and delivered for people. Now it's private companies that are doing this, and individual states are sort of standing back and watching and being dictated to, as the US government was dictated to by Elon Musk in terms of the strategy to be pursued in Ukraine, because Ukraine's military strategy depended on Starlink, which is controlled exclusively by one man, Elon Musk. Go back to 1916. Rockefeller became a billionaire on the back of his companies being broken up as a result of the antitrust movement of the United States. The United States is often seen, and rightly so, as a place where capitalism has advanced beyond limits and control. But the United States has a history of controlling capitalism, and it came in the progressive era, starting in 1900, where there was a bipartisan, that is to say, across left and across right, push against big companies and their overweening control of the economy, and therefore their attempt to translate that control into the control of politics. Rockefeller was one of the robber barons, as they were called back then. And the U.S. government under Theodore Roosevelt, a Republican, and later Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, agreed that company control had to be subject to government, and governments are subject to periodic review by the citizens. And that control reestablished the sort of background, if you like, the political economic background against which the 20th century, which Maya described earlier, was able to unspool, in which you had economic growth, the results could be shared, companies were powerful and were part of the elite, but they weren't beyond the control of governments. It felt clearly like governments were in control. Citizens felt like they had a voice. They could periodically exercise in elections, and it mattered who you elected. It mattered if you chose Valéry Giscard d'Estaing or if you chose François Mitterrand to be president. Those choices had an impact. That's not what it feels like anymore. It feels like the companies are out of control, and what we see in one country after another is there's this sort of latent push that drives populism in many countries to say the elites, the establishment elites, aren't doing the job, and so we need to do better. And the question is, which I hope I'll have a chance to return on, can this populism be turned towards good, good for the sake of democracy? Because many look at populism and they say, these are simple solutions to very complex problems, and the solution is often to demonize outsiders, immigrants, minorities, minority religious groups. And that's undermining of democracy, because democracy depends on pluralism. That is to say, the belief that that people with different beliefs have a right as members of the political community. And the question, I think, that the elites have to face is, yes, they are definitely responsible for where we are, and how is it that the elites can respond to a populism that is demanding of failures to be compensated, and can they do better than they've done before? Because where we are now is in a non-responsive place, and it's driving us very close to the cliff.
Merci beaucoup. On va effectivement revenir sur ce point-là. Merci infiniment.
Thank you very much for your contribution. So, Akim Ben Hamouda, we see that a lot of thoughts have been expressed about disconnection with reality, collusion between the political and the economic elites. So, in your opinion, in the institutions where you have worked or where you're still working, do you have the same impression that the original sin is the fact that we have the economic elites who have taken over, and that's very anti-democratic? Thank you very much. Major question, of course. I'd like to come back very quickly on the value of this debate. You've talked about one of the founding books on the question of elites and sociology, which was written by an economist. You've talked about Pareto. But it's important today to note that this is a major concern in the field of sociology. There are so many works being published, papers being published, essays being published devoted to the question of the elite. And in universities, etc., people are thinking about this. You've got the Oxford Handbook, which devotes a complete work, a special work on a question. It means that it really is at the heart of the debate today. And we all agree to say that this is all placed under the sign of distrust or mistrust and a loss of trust in our elite. I want to come back to these questions which were broached earlier on. There are three phenomena, or three major questions that are behind this mistrust and distrust, this lack of trust. We've mentioned a few of them. But let me come back to what you were talking about at the outset, that tipping point. And I think there was a tipping point. There was a tipping point, and we haven't really talked about it very much. Given the subject of your book, which you talked about, I was waiting for this talk about this tipping point. It was a time when all the scandals that we've been familiar with since Me Too all the way through to today, we get the feeling that among the citizens that there are people who have total impunity, who can do whatever they want in any field, in finance, in economics, and in other fields, in relations with women. And inevitably, I think this crisis of the elites, or this distrust of the elite, I think that's a phenomenon which has been around for many years. But I think since these scandals, then they really have they blotted their copybook. They really have. So this distrust, if I can talk about that for a moment, I think there are three phenomena which are really important. I'm not going to go into them in detail because it might affect them. First is the end of economic prosperity. I believe it's very important. Over the past 26 years, since 2000 to 2000, all the way through to 2026, there were four key moments in terms of the economy. The first moment, which was continuing on from the 90s up until 2009 in the major crisis, where there was overall growth, there was overall prosperity, which was advantageous to many people. Second period, from 2009 to 2019, where the North, developed countries, capitalist countries, were no longer producing prosperity. Prosperity was being produced in the South, in China, in Latin America. And since then, we've had COVID crisis all the way through to today. Then I think prosperity has broken down. We are no longer creating wealth, internationally speaking. The second aspect is that question of inequalities. And I'm not going to talk about the inequalities which you talked about, Mayor, in developing countries, but I'm talking about the southern hemisphere. I've just written an essay on this question of the global south and inequalities. There are four regions in the overall south: Africa, the Middle East and the Arab world, Asia, and Latin America. These are the regions which are experiencing the greatest growth. They are the most integrated into world growth, and they are seeing their inequalities growing at breakneck speed. So these are two major aspects which are important to me. So these elites cannot build a new model where wealth is shared, and also the inequalities.
And last point that contributes to the situation, geopolitical questions are pivotal. Geopolitical questions today, there's a lot of distrust in the global south countries, distrust of the political elites regarding Western modernity, human rights, regarding geopolitical questions. These countries are following the double standard policy. When it comes to conflicts, some countries are being supported, and in other countries there's a sense of solidarity. I'm talking about conflicts in the Middle East and in other countries. These geopolitical questions are important. There's a mismatch between the principles and the positions of elites, and this contributes to this distrust phenomenon. Thank you. Thanks a lot for telling us that you have this notion of Western elites, Jorge Zepeda. So in order to describe the moment that we are experiencing, according to you, do you think that distrust is the only way of contemplating the elites in Mexico? Is there a distrust of elites as it is the case in Europe?
I will have to say that the Mexican situation is very peculiar because the integration with the U.S. in the last 40 years has developed a nation dedicated to exports. And this is in the verge of changing suddenly. To put some numbers to this phenomena, I should say that in April, the last April, Mexican exportations to U.S. market were $50 billion. European exportation as a whole to U.S. market was $40 billion. That is, Mexico, only one country, has 25% more exportations to U.S. market than Europe. Just to put on a scale. For our country, that means that we became an exporting nation, which sounds interesting, but the fact is that it didn't bring prosperity to our country. As Maya has said, what we find out is that now that the party is over, we find out that it wasn't ever a party. in the sense that inequality grew. So as a result of this, 8 years ago, people vote for a leftist government that is in power now, and things start to change in half of the problem, which is distribution. The government has been very successful to improve the economical purchase of the majority of the population. 13 million of people has come out of poverty in the last few years. The problem is that the economy is not growing because the economical elites boycott this project, this government project, by not investing. So the economy has growing less than 1% for the average each year for the last 8 years, which is less than the demographic index of growing in Mexico, which means stagnation. So thanks to Trump, that is in the verge of probably changing with a very dramatic turn, which is suddenly the economical elites find out that the bet that they have take to integrate to United States is in danger by Trump's protectionist policies recently. So they have turned to the government and try to find out a solution for that. And they have brought a new alliance, an historical alliance, because two adversaries that for always have been confrontational antagonists now are starting to talk about a new model, trying to make some equilibrium between growing and distribution. Mexico's singular situation also is interesting because Claudia Sheinbaum, the actual president in Mexico, a woman for the first time, has an enormous popularity due to the social reforms that has brought, but also has some style of modern and scientific. She's a science woman, moderate, very progressive. And the fact is that she has between 70 and 80% of popularity and popular support in the country. That gives her plenty of power to control the government as a whole. But also that gives her the capacity that probably any government in the Western Hemisphere has in this moment, that is the capacity to produce change. So the economical elites have had this shower of reality and finally understood that boycott to this project is not an answer by now. So they come out with a plan that is called Plan Mexico that tried to build the relationships to the economical platform. Just a parenthesis. The drama in Mexico is that all this exportation power are not linked to the economy, the domestic economies. Walmart opens a store in Mexico every 3 days, but the shelves of these stores are full of foreign products. So we didn't develop the change connected to domestic production. So the Plan Mexico was what it's trying to do is to recover that possibility and to invest in these links so that it can produce investment on different business. So far, this is starting, but we are very, we feel there are big chances that for the first time in Mexican contemporary history, the two elites, political and economical, will come together with a proposition to design a formula, a mechanism of growing with some social distribution and a healthier economy.
Ce qui répond déjà un peu à la question de la nécessité des élites. On voit quand les élites forment.
So when the elites, form an alliance, when there's a sense of urgency, there could be lots of benefits, Leon le loser. So you have an interesting profile because you are at the origin of solutions and origin of our problems. This is the crucial point that we've addressed already, education. So if we take a step back, if we are honest to ourselves, maybe we failed. We can be very proud of the French elites in the big schools, but of course these are elites, and it's so I think that equal opportunities concept failed. Thanks a lot for inviting me. I'm not an elite, basically. I'm not part of the elite. I don't think that the elites talk to the elites because we are not within ourselves. But allow me to share 3 points. I will be talking about our schools. These schools, they failed. Why? Because there's a kind of social reproduction. So these schools should be the engine of people, so that people could emancipate themselves socially, so that they could climb up the career ladder. So we recruit anyone. So what is important is the social ladder. We have an equal opportunity program for different students, for students in high schools, and we want to encourage them to be better. So we want to make sure that they've got a good mark, 15 out of 20. So if you look at the schools, they failed because of invisible barriers, cultural, geographical, financial barriers. Then you have to consider self-censorship. At ECP, we are a major school. We don't get any public funding, no funding from the chambers of commerce, and we offer 15 million euros worth of grants with mobility programs. So we will offer 16 million euros so that we can greet and welcome many people. We need to avoid the financial barriers. Elites for all means excellence for all. We need to encourage. You talked about a society with lots of complaints. Critical thought is important, but we've moved from critical thought to criticism as a whole, as a matter of course. So we need to encourage excellence for all. It is not about positive discrimination. We need to make sure that we raise the bar. We need to encourage people, and we need to correct the social biases. We don't want our high schools to fail. We need to take into account these 3 dimensions so that the higher education schools are accessible to everybody. Thank you. So we'll be talking about solutions now. So general interest, can we learn that? But we've said that there's some disconnection from reality. We talked about scandals as well. So general interest, is it important or not? Yes, it is. You're right. The different speakers have talked about the mission of these schools. These schools, should serve a source of inspiration. Everything that we do is useful. Social progress shouldn't be on paper. We need to turn words into deeds. There's a paradigm shift. What about your students? Do they walk the talk? Yes, of course they walk the talk. The students, after the first year, they will be able to take the pulse of a company. So the students, they will go to factories, but we are doing better. help companies, small and medium-sized companies, to sort out their problems and issues. So for 4 months, these students are immersed. This is the 3I program: intervention, impact, immersion, immersive, in order to settle the problems of these corporations for a period of 4 years. A concrete example. Second thing, a paradigm shift. So there was a paradigm whereby economic prosperity would be conducive to social stability and vice versa. So we can learn the new models. What is important is to be able to understand what is happening on the field, in the companies. In France, we are responsible, we are accountable. We are accountable. We need to account for what we do. Our leaders, should be accountable. Thank you. People coup paper, another solution that we need to implement. We talked about control, regulations. This is the role of the media. This is the role of the press. We talked about scandals. So we are talking about elites, and we underscore their problems, but people don't trust democracy. Should we continue to denounce, the excesses of the elites?
Corporate scandal. And I say that it's a moment of exactly accountability, as you say. It's something where the public finally demands from its leaders that there's regulation of these companies, which they suspected were out of control. But the scandal crystallizes that moment and makes it clear. And of course, as Alia says, the transmission belt for that is the media. But we have a media that's ever more broken up into fractions, and so therefore we're getting less and less of a common message. One of the appeals of these corporate scandals is, as I spoke about earlier, there's a large, if you like, latent opinion sitting in the public that these companies are a little bit out of control and government needs to control them. The government of either side, whether it's left or right or a coalition, is listening more to the voices of big business than it is to people. That is the way that capitalism works. Democracy translates the inequalities of capitalism into inequalities of representation, even though we have these periodic elections of one person, one vote. And scandals and other public moments are the times when we hold those groups accountable and we sort of shift that balance, if you like, temporarily. The question is, Aliette, how to shift that balance permanently. And there's a two-part solution, and it involves a sacrifice from, if you like, the mass, the public, and it involves a sacrifice from the elites. The elites, by the way, to slightly differ with my colleague, we are all elites sitting on this stand, right? We are absolutely elites. We have benefited. What have we benefited from the last 30 years? Education and the returns to education in a globalized economy, they have disproportionately gone to people like us, and we have to build a new social contract, and it means that those who are making populist demands for fairness have to feel like there is real fairness. It's not necessarily just redistributive fairness around inequality. People of the left and people of the right will have different views about that. But we've done work on what public opinion looks like, and people's system that the game is rigged and that elites only got there by playing unfairly, which they did. They got into ESCP because their parents could afford to send them to prépa, and they didn't have to, that opportunity is not available to everyone. The United States and France both have a myth of meritocracy, and the French people have long known it wasn't true. The United States people, the American people, are finally coming to realize it's also not true. And so meritocracy, when the word was first invented, was a critique, because to say that you only get what you want if you rise in the educational system is a broken down way of thinking about human values, as the philosopher Michael Sandel has told us very well. So there is an available solution, Aliette, but it's a hard job because it involves sacrifices from us, those of us who have benefited, and losing some of our privileges, and speaking to the large cry that you get every time a populist wins. When Donald Trump wins in 2024 in the United States, when perhaps next year a populist will win the election in France, when in 3 years we could have a populist prime minister of the United Kingdom. You can't just ignore that and say they're only peddling simple solutions and they don't really know how to do it. We have to provide some real accountability, and that means fundamental change that comes from the elites.
Merci, merci beaucoup. Merci. Hakim Benhamouda, elle est intéressante cette...
Thanks a lot. Accountability is a very interesting issue, but who will be accountable? Any problem when combating corruption? Should we get more regulation bodies and more control bodies? I will seize this opportunity in order to answer your first question. But you've already answered my question to a certain extent. I do agree with all my colleagues, with Maya as well, regarding distrust of the elites. But there are some complaints. You talked about public good. That's an important word, concept. And there are some impertinent criticism and complaints vis-à-vis the elites. I'm not familiar with the United States. I'm not familiar with Europe. I'm familiar with the African and Asian countries. I'm familiar with the countries in the Arab world. I worked with finance ministers for many years. If we say today that there's a finance minister who is working with a businessman in order to get some instructions, and if you say that there's a big businessman who can give some instructions to a minister, this is a fact. There might be some exceptions, but in some administrations, they are guarantors of the public good. Of course, they are contending with some difficulties regarding the public good. They cannot find some solutions. It's a hard job. They are struggling to devise a new growth dynamic. They find it difficult to build a new form of prosperity. They find it difficult to rebuild a social contract and to expand education to everybody. They find it difficult to extend health to everybody. They find it difficult to lay the cornerstones of the social contract after World War II. They find it difficult to achieve those objectives, but these elites, I mean, they are trying to find a solution. They might not get the right approaches. But if you say that they fail because they are dependent upon the big companies, and I think that the elites are trying to further the public good, and they are trying to find some answers. They are inefficient. It's very difficult for them to find some answers, but I can tell you that this is the concern of many of these elites. And today, if you look at our discussions, the Acemoglu got the Nobel Prize, Dano Globo, another economist. They offered a book, and they talked about shared prosperity. People are aware of the fact that it is important to get shared prosperity, fewer inequalities, to rebuild the social contract. This is the future of democratic reconstruction in the north, but also in the south. Thank you. Thank you. Robert Jalabert, you wanted to step in, so it will be the concluding word, because we will get a Q&A session afterwards. So I will start with a metaphor, with an image. Answering your question means using the toothpaste. So you have to make sure that the paste gets into the tube. So the answer to the current situation, of course, you have to think about democracy. So the question of democracy is not easy to sort out. When there are some presidential elections, democracy is data. We are in a democratic world, but democracy is a combat, is a fight. In the next elections, I mean, democracy will be an object. It won't be the context. First point. Second point now. I think that we are very optimistic, but no businessman wakes up in the morning and turns to the Ministry of Economy to give some instructions, but they don't need to turn to the Ministry of Economy. There's a kind of porosity of elites. So there's an issue of confiscation. If you look at the power places, they have been confiscated. I'm not talking about the people who is an abstract symbol. So democratic life has been impaired. So today, there's a real cultural battle vis-à-vis the elites. It is no longer a political battle, it is an institutional battle, it's a cultural battle, and this elites will have to face this cultural battle. But we have to focus on the general interest. It's very simple. And of course, you need to focus on the general interest. And if the elites, do not focus on the general interest, they will be replaced by other elites. In the populist movements, there are some elites who are ready to grab power. And the elites are de facto an element that is important. You have to consider the respect for democracy as well. Thank you. So we are talking about elites. So you can put a question, no comment, please. So don't hesitate, to put a question. So 2 questions in a row, and then we'll be able to get you answers. I'm a lawyer. A question to Mr. Benamida. So you talked about a tipping point with Me Too. We haven't waited for Me Too to raise awareness about cronyism, corruption, and many other things. When we read the book of Olivier Barnex, so Olivier Marlex, a French parliamentarian, died, and he talked about distrust of elites, and he lost his life. And I defended elites, and I defended a high civil servant. Don't forget the question. What is your question, please? Mr. Benamida. So this civil servant was sued for influence peddling, for corruption, and when he ended up in prison, he said, I can't understand why I'm in jail. He was someone who thought that he was untouchable. He thought that he was protected. There's no question. Please, your question. I think that people are arrogant. The elites are arrogant. And this has to do with distrust of the elites. So you can ask a question, but a quick one, please. So common good, general interest, 2 concepts. Regarding the elites, I'm not going to make loads of comments. You have some elites, that are sympathetic. There are some financial scandals every day. So in the future, why today's elites will move to the general interest? Is it a power play? Is it an awareness-raising process? Why elites will move to the general interest? Jorge Zepeda?
Say about the last observation is that maybe what is happening in Mexico show us, or it's a possibility that show us that when a society comes in a survival mood, as it is our country right now, maybe it's a chance for the elites that put away some differences in order to confront what is the need of survival. That is, I think that's a hope that is happening in our country. We don't know how long it's gonna last, how deep it's gonna go, but it's a promising scenario that we should observe carefully as a laboratory in the next few months and years, I think.
Mexique comme laboratoire, Léon Lelouza.
Oui, Mexico as a laboratory.
On est passé de l'élite.
So from elite to elitism, high privilege, all the elites, they are there to better serve the general interest and society, and they are a source of inspiration. then people are within themselves. It's a kind of privilege. A word of conclusion. We haven't talked about the core of the topic. I mean, the training of these elites, the education of these elites. In economics, there's a debate between the Gary Baker line and Spence line. Gary Baker told us that with schools, with the academic world, people will acquire these skills and values, and they will be trained, and these people are competent, and they are legitimate to govern. Spence has told us that it's the opposite. These people are already skilled because they come from a privileged family. And schools will be a signal for them to exercise power. So here, what is at stake? It's about education, it's about training. Whatever the education, whatever the training program, it's important to acquire some skills. It's not about a network. It's not about putting an additional line on the CV. How do we make sure that people are competent or skilled? I'm not going to talk about the level of maths, and for example, in mathematics, girls are lagging behind. So what is important is to acquire solid skills and competencies, and it is one of the solutions in order to thwart the power play. And we don't want the elites, to lose some credit. Thanks a lot for your participation. Thanks a lot.